Wyst, Alaster, 1716, by Jack Vance. Read by Ken Hunt. Chapter 1. Alaster cluster, a node of 30,000 live stars, uncounted dead hulks, and vast quantities of interstellar detritus, clung to the inner rim of the galaxy with the unfortunate waste before, the Nonesic Gulf beyond, and the Gaian reach a sparkling haze to the side. For the space traveler, no matter which his angle of approach, a remarkable spectacle was presented. Constellations blazing white, blue, and red, curtains of luminous stuff, broken here, obscured there by black storms of dust, star streams wandering in and out, whorls and spatters of phosphorescent gas. Should Alaster cluster be considered a segment of the Gaian reach? The folk of the cluster seldom reflected upon the matter, and indeed considered themselves neither Gaian nor Alastrid. The typical inhabitant, when asked about his origin, might perhaps cite his native world, or more usually his local district, as if this place were so extraordinary, so special and widely famed, that its reputation hung on every tongue of the galaxy. Parochialism dissolved before the glory of the Conatic who ruled Alaster cluster from his palace Luz on the world Numinus, a structure famed across the human universe. 5 pylons veered up from 5 islets to a groined arch 1,000 feet above the ocean, supporting a first series of promenade decks, then a bank of administrative offices, ceremonial halls, and the core of the Alastrid communications system. Then the Ring of Worlds, then further offices and residential suites for distinguished visitors, and finally 10,000 feet above the ocean, the Conatic's private quarters. The highest pinnacle penetrated the clouds, sometimes piercing through to the upper sky. When sunlight glistened on its iridescent surfaces, Luz was a wonderful sight, and often considered the most inspiring artifact yet created by the human race. Aloft in his eyrie, the Conatic lived without formality. For public appearances, he arrayed himself in a severe black uniform and a black casque, in order to project an image of austerity, vigilance, and inflexible authority. So he was known to his subjects. On more casual occasions, alone in his eyrie, as a high official on the Conatic's service, as an anonymous wanderer in the odd corners of the cluster, he seemed a far easier man, of rather ordinary appearance, notable only for his manner of unobtrusive competence. At Luz, his workroom occupied the highest tip of the eyrie, a cupola with an outlook in all directions. The furnishings were constructed of massive dark wood, a pair of cushioned chairs, a work table, a sideboard supporting a clutter of souvenirs, photographs, curios, and oddments, including a globe of old Earth. To one side of the work table a panel displayed a conventionalized chart of the cluster with 3,000 glittering lights of various colors to represent the inhabited worlds. The workroom served the Conatic as his most familiar and comfortable retreat. The time was now evening. Plum blue twilight suffused the room. The Conatic stood before the western window, watching the passing of the afterglow and the coming of the stars. The quiet was broken by a brief, clear sound. Tink, like a drop of water into a basin. The Conatic spoke without turning. Esclavad? A voice replied, "A deputation of 4 persons has arrived from Arabus on Wist. They announce themselves as the Whispers and request a conference at your convenience." The Conatic, still gazing out across the afterglow, reflected a moment, then said, "I will meet them in an hour. Take them to the Black Chamber and provide suitable refreshment." "As you say, sir." Turning from the window, the Conatic went to his work table. He spoke a number. 1716. 3 cards fell into a hopper. The first, dated 2 weeks previously at Wyst, a city of Arabus, read, "Sir, my previous reports upon the subject at hand are identified by the codes appended below. In gist, Arabus shortly celebrates a centenary festival, to mark 100 years under the aegis of the so-called egalistic manifold. If I may presume to refresh your memory, this document enjoins all men, and specifically all Arabans, to a society based upon human equality, in a condition of freedom from toil, want, and coercion. The realization of these ideals has not been without dislocation. I refer you to my previous reports. The Whispers, an executive committee of 4, have come to take a very serious view of the situation. Their projections convince them that certain fundamental changes are necessary. At the centenary, they will announce a program to revitalize the Araban economy, which may not be popular. The Araban folk, like any others, hope for and expect augmentation rather than constriction of their lives. The present work week comprises 13 hours of more or less uncomplicated routine, which the Arabans nevertheless hope to reduce. To dramatize the need for change, the Whispers will be coming to Luz. They intend to consult with you on a realistic basis, and they hope that you will appear at the Centenary Festival to identify yourself with the new program, and perhaps provide economic assistance. I have been in consultation with the Whispers at Wyst. Tomorrow they return to Unsibal, and will immediately depart for Numinus. In my opinion, they have made a realistic assessment of conditions, and I recommend that you listen to them with sympathetic attention. Bonamico, Conatic's cursor at Unsibal, Arabus. The Conatic read the card with care, then turned to the second card, which had been dated at Wyst on the day after the first message. Extravagant. To the Conatic at Luz, greetings from the Whispers of Arabus. We will presently arrive at Luz, where we hope to confer with you upon matters of great scope and urgency. We will also convey to you an invitation to our centenary festival, which signalizes 100 years of egalism. There is much to be said on this subject, and at our conference we will disclose our thoughts regarding the next 100 years and the adjustments which must inevitably be made. At this time we will solicit your advice and constructive assistance. In all respect, we are the Whispers of Arabus. The Conatic had studied the 2 messages previously and was familiar with their contents. The third message, arriving subsequent to the first 2, was new to him. The Conatic at Luz, from the Alaster centrality at Unsibal, Arabus. It becomes my duty to report upon an odd and disturbing situation. A certain Yantif Ravensroke has presented himself to the centrality with information which he declares to be of the most absolute urgency. Cursor Bonamico is unaccountably absent, and I can think only to request that you immediately send an investigative officer, that he may learn the truth of what may be a serious matter. Claude Moore, Clerk, the Alaster Centrality, Unsibal. Even as the Conatic brooded upon this third message, a fourth dropped into the hopper. To the Conatic at Luz, events are flying in all directions here, to my great distress and consternation. Specifically, I fear for poor Yantif Ravensroke, who is in terrible danger. Unless someone puts a stop, they'll have his blood, or worse. He's accused of a vile crime, but he is surely as innocent as a child. Clerk Moore has been murdered, and Cursor Bonamico cannot be located. Therefore I have ordered Yantif south into the Weird Lands despite the rigors of the way. I send this off in agitation, and with the hope that help is on the way. Alida Gloucester, Clerk, the Alaster Centrality, Unsibal. The Conatic stood motionless, frowning down at the card. After a moment he turned away, and by a twisting wooden staircase descended to the level below. A door slid aside. He entered a car, dropped to the ring of worlds, and by one of the radial sideways, reserved to his private use, rode to chamber 1716. In the vestibule, a placard provided basic data regarding Wist. The single planet of the white star Dwan was small, cool, dense, and populated by over 3 billion persons. He continued into the main chamber. At the center floated a 7-foot globe, a replica in miniature of Wist, although physiographic relief had been exaggerated by a factor of 10 in the interest of clarity. The Conatic touched the surface, and the globe rotated under his hand. The opposed continents, Trembal and Tremora, appeared. The Conatic stopped the rotation. The continents together extended 4,000 miles around the flank of Wyst, from the northern gulf to the moaning ocean in the south, to resemble a rather thick-waisted hourglass. At the equator, or the narrowest section of the hourglass, the continents were split apart by the Salaman Sea, a drowned rift averaging 100 miles in width. That strip of littoral, never more than 20 miles wide between sea and the flanking scarps to north and south, comprised the land of Arabus. To the south were the cities Uncibal and Circe, to the north, Procpunce and Waniz, each pair merging indistinguishably. In effect, Arabus was a single metropolitan area. Beyond the north and south extended the so-called Weird Lands, one-time civilized domains, now a pair of wildernesses shrouded under dark forest. The Konatic turned the globe a half-revolution, and briefly inspected Zoomer and Pombal, island continents opposed across the equator, each an uninviting terrain of mountain crags and half-frozen swamps supporting a minimal population. Moving away from the globe, the Konatic studied an array of effigies. Closest at hand stood a pair of Arabians, dressed alike in gaily patterned smocks, short trousers, and sandals of synthetic fiber. They wore their hair teased out into extravagant puffs and fringes, evidently to the prompting of individual whim. Their expressions were cheerful, if rather distraught, like those of children contemplating a pleasant bit of mischief. Their complexions were pale to medium in tone, and their ethnic type seemed to be mixed. Nearby stood folk from Pombal and Zoomer, men and women of a more distinctive character, tall, large-boned, with long beaked noses, bony jaws, and chins. They wore padded garments studded with copper ornaments, boots and brimless hats of crumpled leather. On the wall behind, a photograph depicted a Zur Shunk rider on his awesome mount, both caparisoned for the sport known as shunkery. Somewhat apart from the other effigies, crouched a middle-aged woman in a hooded gown, striped vertically in yellow, orange, and black. Her fingernails gleamed, as if gilded. Weirdland Witch, read the identifying plaque. Moving to the information register, the Konatic studied a synopsis of Arabian history, which he was familiar only in outline. As he read, he nodded slowly, as if in validation of a private opinion. Turning from the register, he went to examine 3 large photographs on the wall. The first, an aerial view of Uncibal, might have been a geometrical exercise in which rows of many-colored blocks dwindled to a point at the horizon. The second photograph depicted the interior of the 32nd District Stadium. Spectators encrusted the interior. A pair of shunk confronted each other across the field. The third photograph presented a view along one of the great Arabian sideways, a moving strip something more than 100 feet wide, choked with humanity, extending into the distance as far as the lens could see. The Konatic studied the photographs with a trace of awe. The idea of human beings in vast numbers was familiar to him as an abstraction. In the photographs, the abstraction was made real. He glanced through a file of Cursor's reports. One of these 10 years old read, "Arabus is the beating heart of Wist. Despite rumor to the contrary, Arabus functions. Arabus is real. Arabus, in fact, is an amazing experience. Whoever doubts can come to Wist and learn for himself. Immigrants are no longer welcome additions to the overcrowded social facilities." Still, anyone with a sufficiently thick skin can participate either temporarily or permanently in a fantastic social experiment, where food and shelter, like air, are considered the natural right of all men. The newcomer will find himself suddenly relieved of anxieties. He works 2 brief periods of drudge each week, and another 2 hours of maintenance at the block where he resides. He will find himself immediately caught up in a society dedicated to self-fulfillment, pleasure, and frivolity. He will dance, sing, gossip, engage in countless love affairs, endlessly ride the man rivers to no special destination, and waste hours in that obsessive occupation of the Arabians, people-watching. He will make his breakfast, lunch, and dinner upon wholesome, gruff, and nutritious deedle, with a dish of wobbly, as the expression goes, to fill up the cracks. If he is wise, he will learn to tolerate and even enjoy the diet, since there is nothing else to eat. Bonter, or natural food, is almost unknown to Arabus. The problems involved in growing, distributing, and preparing Bonter for 3 billion persons is quite beyond the capacity of those who have resolutely eliminated toil from their lives. Occasionally Bonter is a subject of wistful speculation, but no one seems seriously troubled by its lack. A certain opprobrium attaches to the person who concerns himself overmuch with food. The casual visitor will refrain from grumbling unless he wishes to become known as a gut-trick. So much for the high cuisine of Arabus. It fails to exist. A final note, intoxicants are not produced by any of the public agencies. Disselberg, who drank no wine, beer, or spirit, declared against them as social waste. Nevertheless, every day on every level of every block, someone will be brewing a jug or two of swill from fragments of leftover gruff. And another. Every visitor to Wist expects shocks and surprises, but never can he prepare himself for the sheer bogglement inflicted upon him by reality. He observes the endless blocks dwindling in strict conformity to the laws of perspective until finally they disappear. He stands on an overpass watching the flow of 100-foot man river with its sensitive float of white faces. He visits Dizierfacht on the Unsebal mud flats, a place of carnival, whose attractions include a death house where folk so inclined deliver eloquent orations, then die by suicide to the applause of casual passers-by. He watches a parade of shunk lurch fatefully toward the stadium. He asks himself, is any of this truly real or even possible? He blinks. All is as before. But the incredibility still persists. Perhaps he may depart to the confines of Arabus, to wander the misty forests to the north and south, the so-called Weird Lands. As soon as he crosses the scarps, he finds himself in another world, which apparently exists only to reassure the Arabians that their lot is truly a fortunate one. Hard to imagine that 1,000 years ago these wastes were the provinces of dukes and princes. Trees conceal every trace of the former splendor. Wist is a small world, only 5,000 miles in diameter. A relatively few miles of travel takes one far around the horizons. If one travels south beyond the Weird Lands, he comes at last to the shore of the moaning ocean, to find a land with a character all its own. Merely to watch the opal light of dawn reflecting from the cold gray waves makes the journey well worth the effort. The casual visitor to Wist, however, seldom departs the cities of Arabus, where he may presently feel an almost overpowering suffocation of numbers, a psychic claustrophobia. The subtle person becomes aware of a deeper, darker presence, and he looks about him in fascination, with a crawling of the viscera, like a primeval man watching a cave mouth, certain that a horrid beast waits inside. The Conatic smiled at this somewhat perfervid style of the report. He looked to see who had submitted it. Bonamico, the current cursar, a rather emotional man. Still, who could say? The Conatic himself had never visited Wyst. Perhaps he might share Bonamico's comprehensions. He glanced at a final note, which was also signed by Bonamico. Zoomer and Pombal, the small continents, are mountainous and half-frozen. They deserve mention only because they are the home of the ill-natured shunk and the no less irascible folk who manage them. Time pressed. In a few minutes the Conatic must meet with the Whispers. He gave the globe a final glance and set it spinning, so it would turn for days, until air friction brought it to a halt. Returning aloft, the Conatic went directly to his dressing room, where he created that version of himself which he saw fit to present to the people of the cluster. First, a few touches of skin toner to accentuate the bones of jaw and temple, then film which darkened his eyes and enhanced their intensity, then a clip of simulated cartilage to raise the bridge of his nose and produce a more incisive thrust to his profile. He donned an austere suit of black, relieved only by a silver baton at each shoulder, and finally pulled a cask of black fabric over his close-cropped mat of hair. He touched a button. Across the room appeared the holographic image of himself, a spare, Saturnine man of indeterminate age with an aspect suggesting force and authority. With neither approval nor dissatisfaction he considered the image. He was, so to speak, dressed for work, in the uniform of his calling. Esclavad's quiet voice issued from an unseen source. "The Whispers have arrived in the Black Parlor." "Thank you." The Konatic stepped into the adjoining chamber, a replica of the Black Parlor, exact to the images of the Whispers themselves. 3 men and a woman, dressed in that informal, rather frivolous style current in contemporary Arabus. The Konatic examined the images with care, a reconnaissance he made of almost every deputation, to offset, at least in part, the careful stratagems by which the visitors hoped to further their aims. Uneasiness, rigidity, anger, easy calm, desperation, fatalistic torpor. The Konatic had learned to recognize the indicators, and to judge the mood in which the delegations came to meet him. In the Konatic estimation, this seemed a particularly disparate group, despite the uniformity of their garments. Each presented a different psychological aspect, which frequently signaled disunity or perhaps mutual antagonism. In the case of the Whispers, who were selected by an almost random process, such lack of inner cohesion might be without significance, or so the Konatic reflected. The oldest of the group, a gray-haired man of no great stature, at first glance appeared the least effectual of the 4. He sat awry, neck twisted, head askew, legs splayed, elbows cocked at odd angles, a man sinewy and gaunt with a long-nosed vulpine face. He spoke in a restless, peevish voice. "Heights give me to fret, even here, between 4 walls. I know that the soil lies far below. We should have requested a conference at a low altitude." "Water lies below, not soil," growled another of the Whispers, a massive man with a rather surly expression. His hair, hanging in lank black ringlets, made no concession to the fashionable Araban puff. Of the group, he seemed the most forceful and resolute. The 3rd man said, "If the Konatic trusts his skin to these floors, never fear. Your own far less valuable pelt is safe." "I fear nothing," declared the old man. "Did I not climb the pedestal? Did I not fly in the sea disk to the spaceship?" "True, true," said the 3rd. "Your valor is famous." This was a man somewhat younger than the other 2 and notably well-favored, with a fine straight nose and a smiling debonair expression. He sat close beside the 4th Whisper, a round-faced woman with a pale, rather coarse complexion and a square, assertive jaw. Esclavad entered the room. "The Konatic will give you his attention shortly. He suggests that, meanwhile, you might care to take refreshment." He waved toward the black wall. A buffet slid into the parlor. "Please serve yourselves. You will find that we have taken your preferences into account." Only the Konatic noticed the twitch at the corner of Esclavad's mouth. Esclavad departed the parlor. The crooked old Whisper at once jumped to his feet. "Let's see what we have here," he sidled toward the buffet. "Eh? Oh, what's this, Gruff and Deedle? Can the Konatic afford a trifle of banter for our poor deprived jaws?" The woman said in an even voice, "Surely he thinks it only courteous to serve familiar victuals to his guests." The handsome man uttered a sardonic laugh. "The Konatic is hardly of egoistic persuasion. By definition, he is the elite of the elite. There may be a message here." The massive man went to the buffet and took a cake of Gruff. "I eat it at home. I shall eat it here, and give the matter no thought." The crooked man poured a cup of the viscous, white liquid. He tasted, and made a wry grimace. "The Deedle isn't all that good." Smiling, the Konatic went to sit in a heavy wooden chair. He touched a button, and his image appeared in the black parlor. The Whispers jerked around. The 2 men at the buffet slowly put down their food. The handsome man started to rise, then changed his mind, and remained in his place. Esclavad entered the black parlor and addressed the image. "Sir, these are the Whispers of the Arabus nation on Wist. From Juaniz, the Lady Fosgard." Then he indicated to the massive man. "From Unsibal, the gentleman Orgold." The handsome man. "From Circe, the gentleman Lemist." The crooked man. "From Popunche, the gentleman Delphin." The Konatic said, "I welcome you to Luz. You will notice that I appear before you in projection. This is my invariable precaution, and many uncertainties are circumvented." Fosgard said somewhat tartly, "As a monomarch, and as the elite of the elite, I suppose you go in constant fear of assassination. It is a very real risk. I see hundreds of folk, of every condition. Some inevitably prove to be madmen who fancy me a cruel and luxurious tyrant. I use an entire battery of techniques to avoid their murderous, if well-meant, assaults. Fosgard gave her head a stubborn shake. The Konatic thought, here's a woman of rock-hard conviction. Fosgard said, still, as an absolute master of several trillion persons, you must recognize that yours is a position of unnatural privilege. The Konatic thought, she is also of a somewhat contentious disposition. Aloud he said, naturally. The knowledge is never far from my mind, and is balanced or neutralized only by the fact of its total irrelevance. I fear that you leave me behind. The idea is complex yet simple. I am I, who by reason of events beyond my control, am Konatic. If I were someone else, I would not be Konatic. This is indisputable. The corollary is also clear. There would be a Konatic who was not I. He, like I, would ponder the singularity of his condition. So you see, I, as Konatic, discover no more marvelous privilege to my life than you in your condition as Fosgard of the Whisper. Fosgard laughed uncertainly. She started to reply, only to be preceded by the suave Lemiste. Sir, we are not here to analyze your person or your status, or the chances of fate. In fact, as pragmatic egoists, we deny the existence of fate as a supernormal or ineffable entity. Our mission is more specific. I shall be interested to hear it. Arabus has existed 100 years as an egoistic nation. We are unique in the cluster or perhaps across the Gaian universe. In a short time at our centenary festival, we celebrate a century of achievement. The Konatic reflected in some puzzlement. They take a tone rather different from what I had expected. Once more, take nothing ever for granted. He said, I am, of course, aware of the centenary, and I am considering your kind invitation to be on hand. Lemiste continued in a voice somewhat quick and staccato. As you know, we have constructed an enlightened society, dedicated to full egoism and individual fulfillment. We are naturally anxious to advertise our achievements both for glory and for material benefit, hence our invitation. But let me explain. Ordinarily, the Konatic's presence at an egoistic festival might be considered anomalous, even a compromise of principle. We hope, however, that should you choose to attend, you will put aside your elitist role, and for a period become one with us, residing in our blocks, riding the manways, attending the public spectacles. You will thereby apprehend our institutions on a personal basis. After a moment of thoughtful silence, the Konatic said, This is an interesting proposal. I must give it serious attention. You have taken refreshment. I could have offered you a more elaborate fare, but in view of your principles, I desisted. Delphine, who had restlessly restrained his tongue, at last broke forth. Our principles are real enough. That is why we are here, to advance them, but yet to protect them from their own success. Everywhere in the cluster live jackals and interlopers by the millions. They consider Arabus a charitable hospice where they flock by the myriads to batten upon good things which we have earned through toil and sacrifice. It is done in the name of immigration, which we want to stop. But always we are thwarted by the law of free movement. We have therefore certain demands that we feel— Fosgard quickly interrupted. More properly, requests? Delphine waved his arm in the air. Demands, requests, it all comes out the same end. We want first a stop to immigration. Second, cluster funds to feed the hordes already on hand. Third, new machinery to replace the equipment worn out nurturing the pests. Delphine apparently was not popular with his fellow Whispers. Each sought to suggest dissociation from Delphine's rather vulgar manners. Fosgard spoke in a tone of brittle facetiousness. Well then, Delphine, let's not bore the Konatic with a tirade. Delphine slanted her a cocked grin. Tirade, is it? When one talks of wolves, one does not describe mice. The Konatic values plain talk, so why sit here simpering with our fingers up our arses? Yes, as you like, I'll hold my tongue. He squinted toward the Konatic. I warn you, she'll use an hour to repeat what I gave you in 20 seconds. Fosgard ignored the remark. Sir, the Whisper Lemiste has spoken of our centenary. This has been the primary purpose of our deputation, but other problems to which Whispered Delphine has alluded also exist, and perhaps we might also consider them at this time? By all means, said the Konatic. It is my function to mitigate difficulties, if effectuation is fair, feasible, and countenanced by Alaster basic law. Falsgard said earnestly, Our problems can be expressed in very few words. Delphine could not restrain himself. A single word is enough. Immigrants. 1,000 each week. Apes and lizards. Airy aesthetes, languid ne'er-do-wells with nothing on their minds but girls and banter. We are not allowed to halt them. Is it not absurd? Lemiste said smoothly, Whisper Delphine is exuberant in his terms. Many of the immigrants are worthy idealists. Still, many others are little better than parasites. Delphine would not be denied. Were they all saints, the flow must be halted. Would you believe it? An immigrant excluded me in my own apartment. Falsgard said wryly, Here may be the source of Whispered Delphine's fervor. Orgold spoke for the first time in plangent disgust. You sound like a gaggle of cackshaws. The Konatic said reflectively, 1,000 a week in a population of 3 billion is not a large percentage. Orgold replied in a businesslike manner which affected the Konatic more favorably than did Orgold's coarse and vaguely untidy appearance. Our facilities are already overtended. At this moment we need 18 new sturge plants. Lemiste helpfully inserted an annotation. Sturge is raw food slurry. A new deep layer of drains, tanks, and feeders, 1,000 new blocks. The toil involved is tremendous. The Arabans do not wish to devote whole lifetimes to toil, so steps must be taken. First and perhaps least, if only to quiet Delphine, the influx of immigrants must be halted. Difficult, said the Konatic. Basic law guarantees freedom of movement. Delphine cried out, Eagleism is envied across the cluster. Since all Alaster cannot come to Arabus, then eagleism must be spread across the cluster. This should be your immediate duty. The Konatic showed the trace of a somber smile. I must study your ideas with care. At the moment, their logic eludes me. Delphine muttered under his breath and swung sulkily sideways in his chair. He snapped across his shoulder. The logic is the immigrants' feet. In their multitudes they march on Arabus. 1,000 a week. 10 times as many Arabans commit suicide. Nothing is thereby provided. The Konatic gave an indifferent shrug and turned a dispassionate inspection across the group. Odd, he reflected, that Orgold, Lemiste, and Falsgard, while patiently uninterested in Delphine's views, should allow him to act as spokesman, and to present absurd demands, thereby diminishing the dignity of them all. Lemiste's perceptions were perhaps the keenest of the group. He managed a depreciatory smile. The Whispers are necessarily strong-minded, and we do not always agree on how best to solve our problems. Falsgard said shortly, or even to identify them for that matter. Lemiste paid her no heed. In essence, our machinery is obsolescent. We need new equipment to produce more goods more efficiently. Are you then requesting a grant of money? This certainly would help. On a continuing basis. Why not reclaim the lands to north and south? At one time they supported a population. Lemiste gave his head a dubious shake. Arabans are an urban folk. We know nothing of agriculture. The Konatic rose to his feet. I will send expert investigators to Arabus. They will analyze your situation and make recommendations. Tension broke loose in Falsgard. She exclaimed sharply, We don't want investigators or study commissions. They'll tell us do this, do that. All contra-egoistic. We want no more competition and greed. We can't abandon our gains. Be assured that I will personally study the matter, said the Konatic. Orgold dropped his air of stolid detachment. Then you will come to Wist? Remember, Lemiste called out cheerfully, you are invited to participate in the centenary. I will consider the invitation most carefully. Now then, I noticed you showed only small interest in the collation I sent forth. You might prefer a more adventurous cuisine, and I wish you to be my guests. Along the lower promenades are hundreds of excellent restaurants. Please, dine where you like, and instruct the attendant to place all charges to the Konatic's account." "Thank you," said Falsgard rather tersely. "That is most gracious." The Konatic turned to go, then halted as if on sudden thought. "By the way, who is Yantif Ravensroke?" The whispers stared at him in frozen attitudes of doubt and wonder. Lemiste said at last, "Yantif Ravensroke? I do not recognize the name." "Nor I," cried Delphin, hoarse and trunculent. Falsgard numbly shook her head, and Orgold merely gazed impassively at a point above the Konatic's head. Lemiste asked, "Who is this Yantif?" "A person who has corresponded with me. It is no great matter. If I visit Arabus, I will take the trouble to look him up. Good evening to you all." His image moved into the shadows at the side of the room and faded. In the dressing room, the Konatic removed his casque. "Esclavad." "Sir?" "What do you think of the whispers?" "An odd group. I detect voice tremor in Falsgard and Lemiste. Orgold's assurance is impervious to tension. Delphine lacks all restraint. The name Yantis Ravensroke may not be unfamiliar to them." "Well, there is a mystery here," said the Konatic. "Certainly they did not travel all the way from Wyst to make a series of impossible proposals, quite at odds to their stated purposes." "I agree. Something has altered their viewpoint." "I wonder if there's a connection with Yantif Ravensroke."